Welcome back to Turn Down for What, your source for EV news and updates. Like and subscribe for more content like this episode. Let's tune in now to part 2 of our conversation with Branden Flasch, continuing on from what we were talking about last week. Let's dive on in. And now we're back, and we're continuing our conversation with Branden about the charging infrastructure and the battery technologies. And what we were discussing was the topic of the heat pumps in the vehicles. And you were saying and suggesting that the heat pump in the larger battery packs doesn't make as much of an impact as far as that technology goes. Can you explain what you mean by that, one? But two, does it make any difference with preconditioning and the start of driving with a heat pump in cold weather?
It certainly can make a difference if you're doing a lot of short drives, letting it sit, cold soak, letting it sit, cold soak, driving it short bits. If you're constantly having to heat up the cabin fresh, it can make a difference. But for most use cases, you're heating up the cabin, you're doing your driving, it's staying warm, and then you're done. Most cases. The real benefit of the heat pump, which is not necessarily the heat pump itself, but more in Tesla's implementation of a heat pump with the octo valve and the super manifold and all that, is that you can actually then move the heat around to the different systems. So pulling it from the motors, from the battery, from the cabin, to the battery, to the motors. That's where the real magic of a heat pump can come in versus just a heat pump itself, just to heat the cabin.
So just
Is
throwing a heat
is
pump into a
is the
car
Ford is the Ford system not designed to heat up the battery? Is it are you saying that it's not for the battery? Or are you saying it's for? Do you know? I'm not
I
sure,
haven't dug
honestly.
into it enough to know, but I'm going to guess, or I would hope it has some level of heat scavenging, but I can't say with certainty.
I was hoping that with that solution, what I was insinuating was I was hoping with that solution that it would have a circulation system similar to some of the Teslas, where it is actually warming up your battery and actually having it like at the optimal state when you depart, rather than preconditioning. I mean, preconditioning warms your cabin, but like the preparation of the battery, keeping it warm, that way it holds charge better. It doesn't affect range when departing. And then obviously the Tesla, as you approach a charger, begins to get the battery in its optimal state. I don't think that the Ford tech or a lot of other vehicle battery tech has that. And I'm not enough of a tech savviness in the battery space to know that exact answer. But for me, I assume that that heat pump would help with the heating of the physical battery pack to keep it intact in the colder weather.
Hopefully, I haven't looked at the full diagrams and everything of the Lightning, but I would hope it has a heat scavenging system. Otherwise, it's pointless.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I mean, my hopes would be to see some sort of technology that could utilize while you're charging, it's going to warm the battery an hour or two before and make sure that it's charged to its fullest capacity at a warm state. That way, you have when you leave and unplug, you have like the optimal range. Because I live in East Tennessee. It's not super cold. You saw all the drama news articles about Chicago and some of the stuff that happened up way north. But for me, practically, I drove to to Nashville from where I'm at in East Tennessee. It's about a 4-hour drive, but I had to stop instead of stopping once on the way there, I had to stop twice on the way there for full charges because of the range loss because of the cold weather. And it seems like if you keep the battery system warm in advance and while you're driving, it would hopefully help with the optimization of that, but requires insulation and appropriate heating loops.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, the battery temperature doesn't play a huge impact in your efficiency overall. A lot of it comes down to the cabin heating, the higher air density. Yeah, there's a lot more factors than just the battery temperature.
So once you're actually out there driving, is there enough there just actively moving the vehicle that the battery is going to be at temp and hold its efficiency pretty well
No,
once you're no?
the
Is
battery
it?
generally will not get warm just from driving.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can actually lose battery temperature from driving. I've encountered that many times because on my previous Model S, I had scanned my Tesla running pretty much all the time on a tablet, and I could see my battery temperature. And oftentimes, if I supercharge and then drove afterwards, or even if I was charging at home and then drove afterwards, the battery temperature would go down if it was really cold when I used to live in Minnesota. It doesn't really
It,
matter now. I live in North Carolina where it doesn't really get that cold, but if it's extremely cold, it certainly can.
So this is interesting because, you know, they've just opened up recently now the Tesla charging network to the Fords. And, you know, the Ford does not have a manual battery preconditioning button in them. And so currently this is a problem because these Tesla stations are not in the native navigation. And the only way to precondition is to tell it, I'm going to a charger in the native navigation. It won't work if you're doing it in Apple CarPlay or Google Maps or one of those. You got to find the charger in the native nav, and you've got to send it that way and get it to precondition. So I know the first time that I went down there for the reveal, I thought, well, if I just drive fast enough on the freeway, my battery is going to be nice and warm when I get there and toasty, and it's going to get my full charge. And you're saying that that's not really the case. It's not going to help me doing that. So it really needs that battery precondition to get. What is that number? What's that number look like for to get it up there? Like if you have an OBD scanner, you're trying to figure out where I don't have that function, right? What number should I be looking for that's going to give me that optimum charging?
Yeah, it's highly variable. Depends on the specific vehicle, depends on your state of charge, because the higher your state of charge, the hotter you actually need the battery to hit peak charging speed for that state of charge.
Okay.
Generally, if you're starting at a low state of charge, on most EVs, you need a minimum of 25 C or about 77-degree pack temperature. On a Tesla, it's actually usually actively heating to about 40 C or over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
But I didn't even realize that Ford doesn't have the superchargers in the native nav. Rivian's had that for months with Magic Dock. That's a huge miss on Ford's part.
Magic Dock, they do with the Magic Dock, but it's these new ones though that have opened up the version 3s and version 4s that aren't Magic Dock.
That just came in like a week ago.
Yeah,
that's a huge miss. I mean, that should have been a day one thing.
Yeah, I'm hearing a better route planner just did an update, but we're still waiting for the native navigation to do it. So you have to use the Ford Pass app to find them, or you have to use the Tesla app to find them, or there is an app inside the truck, a Charge Assist app. Now that one, the drawback is you can't use it while driving, so you've got to be parked. So if on mid-drive you need to try to find a nearby charger, you'd have to pull over and completely stop. You can't just voice activate and do it in the native navigation, and so that's they got to get that, you know, fixed and remedied.
That's just crazy to me that they have the data in two different sources, the Ford Pass app and the Charge Assist app, but they don't have it in the app. That is unbelievably bad to me.
And I think this is part of the whole dilemma with Ford, right? Is that because they're using so many different modules from so many different third parties, it's not as simple as Tesla and Rivian and Lucid, where they can just go to their engineers and say, make it do this. And they can make it do that. And I think Ford has to go out and then the next generation, it's going to be different. But in this generation, it still has that dilemma of to make that in navigation update. There's probably 17 different modules from 4 different people that have to update them. And I don't know the details for a fact, right?
That shouldn't be at all how that works. It should just be a map data update. And I mean, if they have the data, there's no excuse.
So I don't know what the thing is. They haven't been specific. They do say it's coming, but Ford doesn't like to give dates, you know what I mean? Whether it's like to be very vague because they don't want to fail on it. But yeah, I think that's one of the things. And then also even within that, and this is one of the big things I kind of wanted to just hear from you on, because there's been a lot of debate about this all over the place. This whole idea of we know V2s won't do it, but nobody knows why. And we think we know why. Like I've read things like that, V2 in Europe can do it because they're working on phase 3, they have phase 3 power and phase 3 power. Yeah, I've read all kinds of different stuff that in V3s, there's some V3s that work and some that don't. All the V4s seem to educate us, because I've seen you chime in on this. And what's the reason? Why is there some V3s that work and some don't? Why do none of the V2s work? What's the deal?
There's no technical reason that the V2 can't work. It is simply a choice by Tesla. I suspect it's due to just the limited power available to share on V2 and just pretty poor power sharing realistically. Just being that, in case you're not familiar, Tesla superchargers, they have the version 2, which is a 1 cabinet to 2 dispenser ratio. I believe all of them have been updated to 150 kilowatt. I think there might be a handful of 135 kilowatt V2 still out there. But it's, when you're having 2 cars, it's split in half. So you have 70-ish kilowatts, depending on the specific version 2 per port. And then you want to park every other. So that way you're not sharing, which also doesn't really work that well for mixing Teslas and non-Teslas.
True.
So that's kind of probably a factor as well. But if Tesla wanted to, they definitely could have made version 2 work with NACS or with CCS. Essentially, they did it in Europe. And,
so they could just put in that board that does it and that DC meter that does it, and they could do that with V2. It's just a choice not to, you think?
correct. Yeah, there's no reason they couldn't.
Oh, that's good knowledge. That's what I'm talking about. It's and you're right. You point that out if you have to do that whole you know, the urinal rules, right? Every other, you know, you don't stand right next to it. You got to do every other. And then yeah, that doesn't do
Wait,
well.
what are you
for the
talking
full-
about?
But it hasn't reached Tennessee yet. You go into the
What?
urinal. It's every other.
I
Every
use the
other.
same.
He
I
helps
use this-
people. That's the
I
problem.
use the same urinal as my buddy. I don't know what you're talking about.
Great.
Got all over my leg. Well, that gets into the etiquette, and we'll get into that. I don't think we've really announced that or anything, but we will be coming out with an etiquette book for EV charging sometime soon.
Brandon, you want to co-author that with us? We're in the middle of it.
We're coming up
I
with
can
an
do a
etiquette book.
review.
We'll have Brandon will do the forward in it, and we'll have him review the facts of it. Yeah, it's so that's a good fair point. I think that what a lot of people are just noticing that there's still parts of the country though, especially up north, and I'm hearing like Dakotas and Montana and those kind of areas, that V2 is what's up there. There are no V3s, and so there's still just some complaints, I guess, that a lot of the V3s are in areas that already had a lot of charging, and that a lot of the areas that are more desolate out in the Midwest and the north. Is there a North Midwest? I don't know what that's called. In that area, Minnesota, right? Minnesota, the Dakotas. I think it's the Dakotas and Montana, and something about that stretch. And then they've just noticed that there's still a lot of gaps where there are V2s there, and there just don't seem to be V3s. And maybe they'll update those. Yeah,
give it a year,
so.
and
Hope so.
Nevi will fill it in. I mean, obviously there's a gap right now, but I mean Tesla and all the other providers are going to come raging out there in the next year with the Nevi program. So
We got to be specific about which Dakota, because North Dakota has only version 3.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
But South Dakota doesn't. North. How did it get
South
further
Dakota
north?
has version 2 across the state.
How strange. So you got to take the high road. You got to get up higher.
Yeah,
That's the secret.
Well, North Dakota was built out, I think, in 2021 or 2020. There was a time when I owned my Model S that I could not drive across North Dakota. So if I wanted to go Minnesota to Montana, I had to go South Dakota.
That's funny.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
and is the key, let me know if this is wrong, but I think the key to identifying if it's a V2 is it seems to have that silver crimp that crimps the hose. Is that the easiest way to spot the V2 versus the V3?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a collar, or it's not a crimp per se, but it's just the collar below the handle.
It's that silver chrome, or not really chrome, I guess, but yeah. It's not all black like the V3 seem to be.
Correct. And the cable's a little bit thicker, but you won't be able to really tell that unless you know what you're looking at, or you're looking at them side by side.
Now I got really lucky, and I got to do the launch day at a V4 charger that was in Los Gatos, California, and it was great because it had the much longer cable. And so one of the other topics that always comes up, and maybe you can speak to this, is the idea of why don't the adapters have an extension cord essentially, right? And can you speak to what that would mean if somebody tried to? Because I've heard there's one manufacturer that is trying to do an extension cord.
Cord envy. Cord envy. That's what you're talking about. So
because those V3s have the short cords, and there's just no the couple. You'll see some pictures on X, on Twitter, whatever you want to call it, where the two examples I had to either park in the wrong stall, or I parked literally outside the stall in order to, next to the curb in order to use it, and only take up the one. So people want an extension. Can you speak to what would happen if somebody tried to put an extension on this? Is it possible? Would it have to derate? Is it more risky? Like, what would occur, you think, if somebody tried to make an extension?
It would have to be probably huge. Yeah,
Just for the heat? For the heat?
Yeah, I mean, you're going from a liquid-cooled cable and liquid-cooled pins to an air-cooled cable that's still doing the same 500, potentially more amps. It's just not practical.
Either that, or it would have to derate
Yes.
you. I mean, you could derate it at the first coupling down to like 300 amps to where it wouldn't have to be liquid cooled, but that's just that's derating the power, right?
Yeah, but it's not as easy as you'd think to just derate the power. You would most likely have to have some sort of active board because it's doing PWM communication, and you can't
that's what
just.
I was thinking. Yeah,
You
that's
can't
the
just
only
put
way.
something in the middle that suddenly derates it. You have to actually have something that's taking that communication, injecting a different communication, and then derating it. It's not that simple.
It would
So
have
could
to
you-
be, I mean, the extender could only really be used maybe on a V2 or something that starts off already lower powered.
But a
You can use
V2 is
that
not
to begin with.
supported. V2 is not supported, so it
Yeah,
wouldn't
my
even
point is
work.
like you'd
Yeah.
have to have a lower powered system to even make that functional.
But I mean, even a version 2 will do 400 amps. That's not an insignificant amount of
Yeah.
power.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a lot of power to shove through one of those cables.
People
So
don't
if it-
realize with EVs how much power is flowing through those cables. Like if you touched it, you die. Like it's like, people I don't think realize the extent of the power infrastructure that's required to run one of these sites. And there needs to
I
be
got to
respect. There needs to be
I got to
respect for that.
explain that to Josh from the data center industry that I came from, building hyperscale data centers. Just the types of systems we would have to do lockout, tag out for very low voltage. That's still more than most. And we're talking about a fraction of the power that's going through our trucks when we're charging. So it's amazing that they can still control that much power and have it to where you can plug in and plug out without having to lock everything out and get everything surrounded. I mean, it's amazing what the technology's been able to do.
So
Yeah,
what
it's
is
a
it?
lot safer than a lot more thought out than most people realize. I mean, it's nearly inch thick, oftentimes parallel runs of stranded copper running to these stations. That's just how much power is flowing to these.
So what is it that I'm seeing when I go? And I've done some things with ChargeNet stations, and they have fairly low power tritium chargers. They're only 75
75s,
kilowatts,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But they have an adapter that will go. It's an extension. It's an adapter that plugs in and has a big round adapter that goes onto the CCS, or maybe it's on the CHAdeMO side. Maybe that's why it
CHAdeMO.
is. So is that it goes onto the CHAdeMO side, and that's I think only 50 kilowatts. Is that why that can get away with the
125
extension?
amps. Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, that's just the Tesla adapter, and it's 125 amps is very different from 500 plus amps.
Okay. Would an adapter be able to have like a thermostat or something, a sensor in it that would then communicate back and say, hey, I need to lower it, or no, it's not?
Not easily. I mean, you can have the safety shutoff that basically just cuts off the control pilot signal and simulates as if you've unplugged. That's your safety shutoff. But to add an actual temperature sensor and modulate the current and everything is far more complicated than it sounds.
So really this is about getting these things replaced with the version 4s is hopefully as soon as they can with those longer cables. That's really the solution here.
Yeah, don't hold your breath.
What now? Speak to the cables. Is this going to be the same thing that the length requires thicker cables? Because you go to an EA or any of these other chargers, and the cable is just massive and it's heavy, and for certain people, it can be unwieldy to try to get this thing over. And you got that giant plug that you're trying to get in there, and then you pick up a Tesla thing, and it's like nothing. I'm plugging it right in one handed. If I ever try to do a video, I literally have to put my phone down to plug in a CCS and a Tesla one with one hand. I can show it and plug it in. Is that cable difference an engineering thing, or is it because the shorter cable is what lets it be so light?
Yes.
Yeah, but
I mean, the shorter run allows it to be smaller conductors. It's liquid cooled. They have temperature monitoring on both sides, on both the vehicle side and on the cable side. So the nominal rating of a version 3 cable is 350 amps, which is not that high. I mean, it's still a sizable amount of power, but in the grand scheme of EV liquid cooled charging cables is pretty low. Like the Huber and Sinner cables used on most EA sites, EVgo sites, and many others, those are 500 amp continuous rated cables with the liquid cooling, whereas the Tesla cables are rated for 350 amps continuous. So it's actually a lower powered cable, but Tesla runs them at nearly double that current because they know Tesla charge curves and they know that it's not going to be at that peak current for very long at all. And I think realistically, the Tesla supercharger network is going to become a much worse experience with all these other EVs mixed in, because most people don't realize those version 3 cabinets, they're about 360, 370 kilowatts split between 4 posts. That's about 90 kilowatts per post, which is not
Really?
good. Yes.
So I thought with version 3, so I know version 2 would split the power, but with version 3, it still splits the power. It's just that you're getting across 4 now, and it's gonna equally split them, or split depending on draw.
Well, it's a variable draw, and they also have a DC bus between the cabinets. So it's a clever system, and it works extremely well with Tesla's vehicles that have a charge curve that's a high peak and then drops right off. So if you overlay multiple Tesla charge curves, you're going to have, unless you all plug in at exactly the same time, which is extremely unlikely, you're never going to have those peaks of 250 kilowatts simultaneously across multiple stalls. So each cabinet is adding 360-ish kilowatts to that total system at the site. And then you can move that around across the entire site. So if you have 2 cars plugging at once or 3 cars plugging at once, you're fine. But even to hit peak power on 3 Teslas at 250 kilowatts, you actually need a 12 stall site, and you need every other stall empty.
Wow.
Otherwise, you're going to have limited power. And as we start mixing in those Rivians, the Lightnings, EGMP cars, once they maybe have 1,000-volt support, that can hold 200 plus kilowatts for 10, 15 minutes, the whole
You'll derate
supercharger
the whole site.
powertrain model falls apart.
Wow. That is great knowledge, man. That is
I've
huge.
done a whole series of videos of doing deep dives on Tesla's version 3 architecture, and it's very clever for Tesla vehicles, but it does not work when you start adding in far more aggressive charge curves.
I don't think people appreciate that, right? The engineers have done a great job of engineering for what they've engineered, and now you're going to inject the EGMPs and and these that pull a lot more and have much higher charging curve. You put a Taycan on there, what's going to happen?
Well, it's worth noting the EGMPs and the Taycans will get pretty poor charging on superchargers because there's still only 500-volt output.
And Lucid as well, right? Lucid would have the same problem.
Yeah, Lucid is the worst of all of them, realistically. They only get 50 kilowatts.
Yeah, that's going to be, I think that is going to be something. I'm curious if you think there's any way for them to solve that or make that better. So they did something with the Lightning. Maybe you can speak to both things, because the Lightning, when I first used to plug into a Magic Dock, would only give me the 120, 130, which is where I get to after about 10 minutes. It wouldn't give me the boost. Now I'm getting the boost again. So they did something over the air. Can you speak to that and speak to, is that something that maybe there's more they can do, or speak to that?
Well, so it's not really a boost per se on the adapter or on the supercharger. That's just the Lightning charge curve. That's nothing Lightning specific, or I guess it is Lightning specific, but it's not supercharger specific. That's just how the Lightning is.
Lightning and Mach-E both, I think, do that, right?
Correct. Yeah, Lightning's shorter, so it's even less impactful. But basically, initially Tesla was running the Magic Dock adapters, which is nearly identical to the adapter that you have and others have from Tesla, at 350 amps, which, if you have been listening, you'll notice that I said the nominal rating of a Tesla version 3 supercharger cable is 350 amps.
Yes.
They were initially playing it safe, is my theory, and only running it at 350 amps to gather the data, see how those temperatures are going, see how the adapters are heating up, and then probably turned up a few here and there without people realizing it, just to get more data at 500 amps or in their labs. But realistically, you need that real world data. You need an adapter that's been baking in the sun. You need it in 100 degrees in Arizona. You need it in 20 degrees in New York. You need a lot of data to really make that decision of, can you run it higher? And shortly before they opened up the network for the Fords, they boosted all of the Magic Dock outputs to full 500 amps. In theory, probably more. I think they've removed the limitation completely, but no non-Tesla will actually pull more than 500 amps as of right now. So we don't actually know if it will do more, if it's a hard 500 amp limit, which is what most CCS stations will do.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that the Ford adapter actually has any sort of 10-minute limit. They're just saying that because that's what the Lightning charge curve is. It will do long beyond that.
Yep. No, you're totally right. It's the same adapter. Rivian's going to use that exact same adapter when they give theirs out for free. And it's not, when they say 10 minutes, it's because the Ford itself is internally, which again, I'm going to spout knowledge that I'm hearing, right? But I'm hearing that the reason for that is that the wiring that's used inside the Lightning can hold it for about 10 minutes. But if you continue to go beyond that at a high state of charge, if you tried to leave it up there for too long, that the wiring itself would heat up into an unsafe state. And I don't know if that sounds accurate to you, but that seems to be my understanding, is that's just the wiring that's used and the gauges. That's about where they feel safe with it. They feel really safe with it at that. It could go longer, but that's where they feel good about it. And then it ramps down to where it can hold that nice steady curve for a long time in the 120, 130 range.
I think there's a lot of variables that go into charge curves.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty plausible to me. They also wanted to just give a consistent experience that every time you plug in, you get that boost and then it drops back down. But if it's anything like the Mach-E with the high voltage junction box issues, it sounds like some cost engineering to me.
Yeah, the Lightning I don't think has that. And the Mach-E in theory has had all of those recalled, those high junction boxes in theory, but the Lightning is unique in that it's not necessarily state of charge dependent. You can plug it in at 15, you can plug it in at 50, and it'll still give you that boost. which is
Yeah.
really nice. And there's a lot of vehicles where, well, so you're hesitant. Why you have
I
you
don't
think it's
love
not
it.
nice? You don't.
I think it's way too arbitrary. It needs to be a lot
Okay.
more variable driven and actual temperature and data driven, not just, hey, you're going to plug in, you get 500 amps for 10 minutes. You get 500 amps for 10 minutes. You can keep unplugging and plugging back in and keep getting it. I hate arbitrary boosts or limitations. It should all be data driven.
I wonder if it knows if you've plugged it in, gotten your boost already, and within 5 minutes unplug and plug it back in, if it would know that, or if it really is would just kick it right
Sounds
back
like
up again. We should try that out. When I catch my truck on fire, try a 10-minute boost 3 times in a row. I gotta explain that to
Tell them how it happened.
Yeah, you'd be the one that the firefighters are trying to put out the vehicle fire and they don't know
Right.
what happened. Yeah.
if the Ford comms team is watching this, I'm in trouble if I try to warranty that. Yeah, that's awesome.
What they don't know won't kill them.
So the other thing I kind of wanted to bounce off you is I took this trip down to Southern California for Will, who we've had on the show, F the Pump. He took delivery of a Cybertruck a month or so back, and I drove down there. It was my first kind of experience trying to get on a medium distance. I won't call it long distance by probably Brandon's standards, but I went from Northern California to Long Beach and then back, and 2 charge stops, one at the kind of famous Harris Ranch, and then another one kind of near Bakersfield. And then I did the same thing on the way back. I stopped at Santa Clarita, where Magic Mountain is, if anybody knows that, right before the Grapevine, and then I stopped again at Harris Ranch. And so I'll self-admit, we talked when we had Francie from Out of Spec on here, how you guys all will not plug into a 350 charger. You're responsible, kind people, and you plug into a 150. I am a jerk, and I seek out the 350 EA charger every time. And this is where I'm hoping Brandon can kind of educate me, because here is what I have found. I plug into, I don't know how much I want to ramble here, but every time I plug into a 150, I've never had more than like 105. I never get 120, 130, nothing like that, right? But if I plug into a 350, I'll get that boost that I'm supposed to get, and then it settles into a nice 120, 130. I cannot get 120, 130 out of a 150. The math tells me I should at an idiot level, because I don't know what I'm talking about. If I'm in a 150, why can I not get 120, 130? And then the other thing I see is I consistently see 150s derate to a 33. That cannot be a coincidence. Why am I constantly seeing 33 kilowatts out of an EA station? That there has to be some kind of module reason or something going on. And the last thing,
we know why. We know why.
There's 2 words to that. Electrify America. That's the answer to your.
Well, no. It's Huber and Sooner.
So tell me about,
you.
and then the last
yeah.
thing real quick too is, and then one time when I was in Santa Clarita, when I plugged in, it says, "Hello Juan EV6." And like, I'm Chris in a Lightning. It thought my name was Juan, and it thought I was in an EV6 on the screen. What the heck's going on? What's with 33 kilowatts? Why can't I get 120, 130 out of a 150? Why does it think my name is Juan?
Well, the Juan thing, I can't explain that. That just sounds like the software's acting up, which can't say I'm shocked. You should use a 350 if it's available, if you're not blocking anyone else, because then you'll get full 500 amps. It matters less on your standard range, but it actually is pretty beneficial on the extended range, because those 100%. Need the full 500 amps for the boost, which sure, you're not getting 350 kilowatts, but you need that 500 amps. And unless you're on a 350 kilowatt Electrify America, you're not going to get 500 amps. You're probably going to get about 350 amps. And just to dumb it down to a very basic level, to get your kilowatts, you multiply your amps, which is your current, times your voltage. And Ford vehicles have very low pack voltage, usually in the like 330 to 350 range, sometimes as low as 300 depending on state of charge. Voltage varies with state of charge. You multiply those 2 values, divide by 1,000, that's your kilowatts. So you need that full 500 amps to get that 170, 175 kilowatts boost on the extended range, as Josh was mentioning. As far as the 33 kilowatts goes, that's a fail-safe mode on the Huber and Sooner cables that basically the cooling's not working. It can't sense if the cooling's working. The temperature reading's not there. Something in that system's acting up, and it's defaulting to the nominal rating of that cable, which is about 100 amps. So that you're getting pack voltage times 100 amps, which is 33 kilowatts. So other vehicles may get 37, 38, 42 kilowatts. You're getting 33 because your pack voltage is low.
Look at that. See, that's why I call you the key master. This is why you have
That's some refined math right there.
It is. That is a perfectly reasonable. So what's happening there is that's just basically what it can do without. So those have liquid cooling just like the Tesla. It's just unlike the Tesla, they break all the time. Is that what's going on?
Yeah,
Essentially.
yeah.
And then do
You
you
can't
think
deny it.
Now, question: does the new Electrify America models use the same cable?
I think they have different generations of the same cable, but yes, they're the same base Radox HPC cable from Huber and Sooner.
Gotcha. Because I've had a lot more success with, I mean, obviously updated hardware, but it seems like there's a little bit more reliability out of some of the newer stations I've used.
It could just be that they're newer.
Yeah,
They just haven't failed yet sometimes.
Yeah, they failed yet. Yeah, there's a reason EA has the reputation that it has, but that's okay.
so? As someone who is involved with as a CPO operator, right on that end of things, I know I often criticize until I did I was able to go to the San Francisco EA, the indoor with 20 chargers, and it is I'm not so one thing caveat, I have only DC fast charged like maybe a dozen times or something, right? I very rarely DC fast charge, but until that Electrify America experience in San Francisco, I had literally never plugged into an EA station and gotten it to work the first try. I either had a comms error or a derate or something, a broken handle every single time. There was something. It is documented. I used to do rate your charge. I've got videos of this thing. Every time there was a problem until that one. But then I would post this stuff and just so excited about Tesla. And then there are folks that are like, wow, they would, before the Tesla network opened, you'd get, there's nothing wrong with Electrify America. I've traveled the country. I don't have these problems. And of course, those same people now are super excited to have the Tesla network. But at the time, I would hear all these like great stories, not perfect, but certainly better than what I experienced. And they were often not in California. They were other parts of the country. Is what's going on there that California is just so busy and has so many EVs that they're just used and beat, and it's whereas in other parts of the country there's just isn't as much volume, and so you have a higher success rate outside of California. And I'm in my little bubble surrounded by Teslas and broken EAs. Like, what did you see when you were out there doing that?
I mean, it's a combination of factors. Yes, California has higher utilization than anywhere else. So those sites are just getting beaten to crap by so many people using them. But it also comes down to service. Some areas of the country have pretty reliable EA, others have not so reliable EA. Comes down to the service partners, comes down to the different hardware deployed in different regions. A lot of those have been replaced at this point. Time will tell how reliable the new hardware is. But there's just so many factors. And I think it's also partially to blame by the induced demand of all these CPO deals with all the different OEMs, that the free charging, the X amount, the unlimited for X amount of years, it just puts so much artificial demand on EA that it could not handle it.
And I think the maintenance teams of Tesla do a better job because they're utilized far more than the EA network because of the amount of vehicles on the road. But their maintenance, I think, of their units and keeping things up and running, I think stands better, obviously, than the EA model, where I think maybe they overextended, like you're saying, and they're getting beat up and overused, and they haven't had the correct maintenancing to service across the board. Because some of the stations I had issues with for months and months and months got upgraded and they're now functioning, but that's just the kind of thing that you need to have a lot of maintenance with. This type of power movement requires a lot of upkeep and maintenance on those units, and I think that they maybe had suffered based on budgeting. I don't know what the answer is there, but I think that their maintenance of their units was not nearly what Tesla's was as far as the reliability of the experience.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that comes down to Electrify America mostly uses third-party technicians that they contract with versus Tesla has almost entirely in-house technicians. I don't know exactly what Tesla's response times expectations are, but I know a friend of mine that's a Tesla tech, he had to leave his family Christmas a couple of years ago because there was an entire site down 3 hours away. He literally finished his Christmas meal and then hopped in his car on Christmas night. He has 2 little kids and went to go fix the station because it was on a critical corridor and Tesla drivers needed to charge.
Wow, shout out to that guy, man.
EA would just be down for 3 weeks and nobody would care.
Yes. So I think the last thing
Oh, sorry. It also comes down to Tesla sites just have more ports. So you
Sure.
can have a Tesla site that might have 2 ports down. It's
Who
probably
cares?
fine because there's 10 other ones or 12
Yeah.
other ones or 16 other ones or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas most EA sites are 4 ports. So if you have 2 down, that's 50% capacity.
And it means each port gets utilized less overall.
Yeah, well, yeah, and Tesla's replacing their cables far more often than anyone else.
I think the last topic I want to throw out here as we close it out is I saw a little back and forth with you and Kyle Connor talking about how you've seen so many CPOs do things wrong, and like you two seem to know exactly what you were talking about, right? That you two seemed right aligned with, without me from the outsider, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what are these things? And so as you've got, Jesse and Josh are about to get into this world of CPOs. How do we make sure that Kyle and Brandon don't visit a Power Up America and have one of these head shaking CPO experiences? If you had to give if you could just touch on some of that, like some takeaways as they enter this world, what would get a Brandon approved? What are the things they need to keep in mind? What are the important things? And then I think close out by telling us what's next for you. What's your next video we should be looking for on your
without saying use your product. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. We want to hear. We definitely want to hear about your product, and we'd love to get maybe off the air some more details on that. But just in terms of the inside baseball that you guys clearly knew what you were talking about. What are these things that you guys were talking about, and what does Jesse and Josh need to avoid here?
Yeah, I don't even remember what thread that was, but I could talk about this for hours. I mean, it's bollard placement, it's cable lengths, it's the access aisles, it's the distributed versus all-in-one chargers, it's the matching the charge speed to the dwell times, it's location off the interstate. It's just every single thing. I don't think there's any CPO that has nailed every single one of those things.
Well, wait till you show up to Power Up America in the next 6 months.
Challenge accepted.
Pop over the mountain.
Even when I see it.
Pop over the mountain from North Carolina and come visit us in Fall Branch when that site opens, and we'll show you how charging's done.
I'll believe it when I see
it. Is that part of when you've switched now to the hardware side? Is that part of when you're selling the hardware? Is that part of the conversations that you're having, or do these CPOs not really want to? Do they just want to buy the hardware and that's all they want from you? Or are you doing some of the post purchase maintenance support? Are you doing some of the consulting on the front end of how to best use it, or is it really just here's the product? Like, what does it vary?
I do a little bit of everything. It really depends on the customer, though. Some are more experienced than others, and some are more open to feedback than others.
Yeah. Would you say Tesla is doing it the best so far?
As far as site design and overall specking of sites?
No. What is the best charge CPO or station that you've been to? What's the one that you're like, if you had to bring Josh and Jesse to visit one, where would that be?
It would not be in North America. It would be in Norway.
Wow. Time for a trip to Norway, guys.
Let's go. I'm good for that.
Norway,
We'll get tickets next week.
Yeah. I mean, Norway's doing under the canopy gas station. They're ripping out gas pumps and putting in chargers under the canopy, pull through. They're doing huge charge parks. They're doing vacuums co-located with it. They're doing it at multi-level gas stations right off of service plazas. No one in North America is getting it like Norway.
Covered charging with pull-through design. That's interesting.
If you offered a scooter for people to ride that can get up to 23 miles while they charge, so they could go downtown, and that would be free at the charge site. Yeah, that'd be cool, wouldn't it, Josh?
That would be pretty cool. I like the sound of
that.
that.
Sounds like a huge liability.
Yeah, I think you're asking for trouble on that one.
They asked us to put them in, so we're going to do it. The state asked us.
Micro-mobility.
So
it'd be hosted by a third party, but yeah.
What's next in the queue for you, man? As we close it out, where do people go to see your content, and what are you working on next that you think is going to go up there?
Well, I'm looking at some charge adapters. This thing is absolutely terrifying to me. It's an 2-in-1. It does DC and AC in a Tesla adapter.
Nice.
It's terrifying because if you're AC charging up here with the AC pins and this flap is open, you've got hot AC on the DC pins down here.
Wow.
It is.
That seems safe.
Terrifying. And the reverse is true also. If you're DC charging, you've got hot DC up here on the AC pins.
So we've asked this before, like why these chargers, for example, the ones that we got from Tesla and the one that A to Z has and the one that Lectron has, these are only for DC charging from NACS to CCS, and you can't then turn and use that same adapter for your AC charging on a wall connector at home. And is this the reason why it's the safety that all those pins are going to be hot and it just doesn't have the technology to isolate it and lock it out?
I mean, you could. It would just have to be bigger. You'd have to have relays or switches or something to isolate whether it's going to DC or AC, because NACS, the Tesla plug, has AC and DC shared. And something I didn't actually realize until recently is that CCS and NACS, they actually have the DC pins flipped. So it has to cross over within this adapter. So it goes from this DC pin to the opposite side DC pin on the NACS.
Wow.
So it's even crazier that they have to not only do the heat management in that crossover, but also the isolation in that crossover.
Wow.
The Keymaster breaking it down.
I did not know that one.
So where do they find you, Branden? Where are they going to find you to see these videos and to see your past content and everything from when you were in your Rivian to now in your Y? Where do they find you?
Yeah, just search Branden Flasch on all your favorite social media. YouTube is kind of my main, where I put my main content, but day to day I'm on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Branden Flasch, YouTube at Branden Flasch, Instagram at Branden Flasch. I'm at Branden Flasch everywhere.
Awesome. Loved having you on the show, man. I really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a joy. We'll have you on sometime again soon to get your honest review on a Power Up America station.
I'm going to make me drive out there.
There we go. Thanks for tuning in to Turn Down for What. Tune in next week for more EV news and updates. See you then.